The Galactic Empire had ruled the stars for centuries, crushing civilizations and absorbing them into its vast dominion. Every species that resisted was swiftly eliminated, their homeworlds turned into lifeless ruins. The Empire believed in absolute control, and any race that showed signs of strength or defiance was marked for destruction. For a long time, humanity was ignored, seen as a primitive species from a backwater planet. But that changed when humans proved they were not only survivors, but warriors, unlike anything the galaxy had ever faced. They had adapted, fought back, and even won battles against the Empire's forces, something that no other young race had ever managed to do. The Emperor and his high command could not allow this to continue. If left unchecked, humanity could rise to challenge their rule, and that was unacceptable. A decision was made: Earth's leadership had to be eliminated, and the best way to do it was through silent, precise assassination. The Empire did not want an open war. They wanted humanity to fall apart from within, leaderless, and in chaos. To carry out this mission, they turned to their most feared assassins, the Silent Blades. The Silent Blades were not just killers, they were legends, whispered about in fear across the galaxy. Trained from birth, enhanced with cybernetic implants, and masters of every form of combat, they had toppled entire governments without a single war being fought. No security system could stop them. No fortress was safe from their reach. They could slip into any place unseen, strike with deadly precision, and vanish without a trace. There were only a handful of them, but they were enough. The Empire selected 5 of its deadliest assassins and gave them a mission unlike any other: eliminate Earth's top leaders and throw the planet into disorder. Without leadership, humanity would collapse, and the Empire could take over without resistance. Confident in their abilities, the Silent Blades boarded a stealth ship and set their course for Earth, fully expecting this mission to be no different from the countless others they had completed. As their ship approached Earth, they activated cloaking technology, slipping past satellites and orbital defenses like ghosts. They had studied human security systems, their weaknesses, and the patterns of their targets. Every detail was planned with precision. Their first target was a high-ranking military commander, a man who had led successful operations against the Empire's forces. He lived in a heavily guarded compound, surrounded by elite soldiers, but to the Silent Blades, it was no challenge at all. Moving like shadows in the night, they bypassed security systems, evaded patrols, and entered the commander's residence undetected. Within seconds, the target was dead, his throat slit before he even realized danger was near. The assassins left no trace of their presence, only a message carved into the wall in an alien script: the Empire sees all. News of the commander's death spread quickly, creating shockwaves across Earth. Governments scrambled to understand what had happened, but there were no clues, no evidence, nothing to trace. It was as if death itself had come and gone without a sound. Meanwhile, the Silent Blades moved on to their next target, a scientist working on advanced military technology that could give humanity an edge in future battles. He was guarded even more heavily than the commander, his lab protected by state-of-the-art security, but it made no difference. The assassin slipped inside unnoticed, reaching the scientist as he worked late into the night. Before he could react, a blade pierced his heart, and the killers disappeared, leaving behind only silence and fear. One by one, Earth's most important figures were eliminated, each death striking a deeper wound into the planet's defenses. Governments were in chaos, unable to understand how their best security forces had failed so completely. Panic began to spread. If these assassinations continued, Earth would soon fall into disarray, and the Empire could take control without ever firing a single shot. It was the perfect strategy. But just as the assassins believed victory was within reach, something changed. Earth was not like the other planets the Empire had conquered. Humans had a way of fighting back in ways no one expected. When conventional forces failed, they turned to something older, something the rest of the galaxy had long forgotten: an ancient warrior tradition passed down through centuries. The response to the Silent Blades was not an army, not a fleet, but a single warrior. A man trained in the art of remaining unseen, striking with deadly precision, and vanishing without a trace. He was not enhanced with cybernetics, not armed with advanced alien technology. He was simply a ninja, and he was all that humanity needed. The assassins planned their next strike. They noticed something strange. One of their own had gone missing. There was no sound, no alarm, no sign of struggle, only an empty space where he had been. The remaining assassins activated their tracking systems, scanning for any sign of their lost member, but there was nothing. For the first time, a feeling they had never known crept into their minds: uncertainty. They were the galaxy's greatest killers, and yet one of them had disappeared without a trace. They continued their mission, but something was different now. The air felt heavier, the shadows darker, and the silence was no longer comforting, it was menacing. Then, another one vanished. One moment he was there, the next, gone. No screams, no alerts, just emptiness where he had once stood. The assassins, once fearless, now felt something foreign creeping into their minds: fear. They tried to regroup, but the moment they did, the lights flickered, and a whisper echoed through the darkness. It was not in an alien language, not in the Empire's tongue, but something older, something chilling. A single word, spoken in perfect stillness: your hunt is over. And then, the nightmare truly began. The Silent Blades had never known failure. In every mission, they moved like phantoms, leaving nothing but corpses and fear in their wake. But now, something was wrong. Two of their own had vanished without a sound, something that had never happened before. No alarms had been triggered, no sign of struggle left behind. It was as if the darkness itself had swallowed them. The remaining three assassins, still highly trained and deadly, refused to let fear take hold. They were the best killers in the galaxy, and yet, for the first time, they felt like prey. They adjusted their tactics, increasing their vigilance, scanning every shadow, every flicker of movement. Their leader, Kavor, ordered complete silence, no unnecessary communication, no reckless moves. They had to find the enemy before he found them. But deep inside, even he knew the truth. The enemy had already found them. The assassins moved through the city, slipping unseen through alleys and rooftops, their suits cloaked in advanced stealth fields. They had one last target to eliminate, but completing their mission was no longer their priority. Survival came first. Kavor activated his visor, scanning for any trace of their missing comrades, but there was nothing: no energy signatures, no heat traces, no bodies. It was as if they had never existed. That was impossible. Even if someone had managed to kill them, there should have been evidence. Instead, all that remained was an eerie silence, pressing down on them like an unseen force. The city lights flickered in the distance, but the darkness between them felt unnatural, almost alive. The assassins exchanged glances, their expressions hidden behind their masks, but they all shared the same thought. This mission was no longer about controlling Earth, it was about escaping it. Then, without warning, another assassin fell. One moment he was moving in perfect formation, the next he was gone. No sound, no struggle, just an empty space where he had been. The remaining two assassins froze, weapons drawn, their eyes scanning the shadows. They activated every sensor, every detection system, but there was still nothing. Kavor's breath was steady, his heart rate controlled, but even his discipline couldn't stop the growing sense of unease. This wasn't normal. This wasn't war. This was a hunt, and they were the ones being hunted. His companion, Vec, whispered through the comms, his voice sharp but shaken. "We need to get out. Now." Kavor nodded, signaling for a retreat, but it was already too late. A soft rustle echoed from the rooftops, almost too quiet to notice. It could have been the wind. It could have been nothing. But in that moment, they both knew they weren't alone. Kavor spun, his blade drawn, striking at the air where he thought the threat would be. But his weapon met nothing. The air itself seemed to shift, and before he could react, Vec let out a strangled gasp. Kavor turned just in time to see a dark figure. For the first time in his life, Kavor felt true fear. He had faced warriors, soldiers, even beasts on savage worlds, but never something like this. This wasn't just an opponent. This was something beyond his understanding. He took a slow step backward, his training keeping him calm, but his instincts screaming at him to run. He had to escape, to warn the Empire that Earth was not what they thought it was. But deep down, he already knew he would never leave this planet alive. He activated every countermeasure, filling the area with smoke, disrupting every sensor. He moved unpredictably, using every trick he had been taught, but it didn't matter. The shadows moved with him. The city itself felt like it was breathing, closing in. And then, a whisper. Not in his language, not in any language he knew, but in something ancient, something terrifying. I see you. Kavor barely had time to react before pain exploded in his side. He lashed out, his blade slicing through empty air, but there was nothing there. Another strike, another sharp sting of pain, and he stumbled. His vision blurred, his enhanced body struggling to keep up. He had fought warriors who had taken years to master their craft. But whoever this was had spent a lifetime in the shadows, perfecting an art lost to time. Kavor gritted his teeth, forcing himself to stand, but as he raised his weapon, he felt a presence behind him, impossibly close. He turned, fast, but not fast enough. A gloved hand wrapped around his throat, pulling him into the darkness. The last thing he saw was a pair of eyes, calm, focused, and merciless. Then, there was nothing. The silent blades had come to Earth as hunters, but now they were the ones being hunted. The first signs of danger had been subtle, a missing comrade, a faint whisper in the darkness, an unsettling feeling that something was watching them. But now, it was undeniable. Two of their best assassins had vanished without a sound, their presence erased as if they had never existed. The remaining three knew they were facing something unlike anything in the galaxy. Their mission had been simple: eliminate key human leaders and leave the planet in chaos. They had expected a fight, but they had also expected to win. Now, for the first time, they felt doubt creeping into their minds. The city around them was eerily silent, the flickering streetlights casting long, distorted shadows that seemed to move on their own. Kavor, the leader of the assassins, tightened his grip on his blade, scanning every rooftop, every alley, every movement in the darkness. The enemy was near. He could feel it. The assassins regrouped in a deserted industrial district, their cloaking devices shimmering faintly as they blended into the surroundings. They had the best technology the Empire could provide: stealth suits that made them nearly invisible, motion trackers that detected the smallest movements, weapons that could kill in absolute silence. Yet none of it had helped them so far. Their enemy was something different, something ancient, something that understood the darkness better than they ever could. Vec, the second in command, whispered through the comms, his voice steady but strained. "We need to stop moving blindly. We're being stalked." Kavor didn't respond immediately. He knew Vec was right. Every time they changed locations, another one of them disappeared. The enemy was waiting for them to make a mistake. They needed to turn the tables to become the hunters once more. Kavor made a decision. They would set a trap. Instead of running, they would lure their enemy into the open and strike first. They found an abandoned factory, its rusted metal walls covered in graffiti, its interior filled with shadows. It was the perfect battleground. They placed motion sensors at every entrance, set up tripwires, and positioned themselves at strategic points, ready to unleash their full firepower the moment their enemy revealed itself. Then they waited. Minutes passed. The silence was unbearable. The assassins controlled their breathing, their bodies still as statues. Then the sensors flickered. A movement too fast, too precise to be an ordinary human. Kavor signaled to his team, weapons ready. The enemy was here. A sudden burst of motion, a shadow dashing across the ceiling. The assassins opened fire, their weapons spitting silent death, but they hit nothing. The shadow was already gone. A soft thud echoed from the far end of the factory. Kavor turned, eyes scanning the darkness, but he saw nothing. Then, a sharp gasp. He spun around just in time to see one of his men collapse, a blade buried in his throat. There had been no warning, no sound, just a flicker of movement and death. The assassin's trap had failed. They weren't hunting anything. They were walking into their own demise. Panic threatened to take over, but Kavor forced himself to think. He signaled Vec to retreat, moving toward an exit, But the moment they stepped into the open, the lights above them shattered, plunging the factory into absolute darkness. It wasn't natural. It was planned. The enemy had been waiting for them to run. The remaining two assassins switched to night vision, but even that didn't help. The shadows seemed deeper than before, swallowing everything. And then, a whisper, soft, cold, inhuman. "You do not belong here." Vec reacted too late. A blur of movement, a silent strike, and he was gone, his body pulled into the darkness before he could scream. Kavor was alone. His heart pounded, but he refused to let fear take over. He had been trained for every situation, had killed hundreds in the name of the Empire. But never had he faced an enemy like this. He moved cautiously, his blade drawn, scanning for any sign of movement. He needed to escape, to warn the Empire that Earth was not weak, that something far deadlier than they had imagined lived in its shadows. But as he took his first step toward the exit, a soft sound came from behind him. A breath. A presence. He spun, slashing with all his strength, but his blade met only air. And then, pain. A cold, sharp edge pressing against his throat. He didn't even see his attacker move. The figure holding the blade was barely visible, a silhouette against the darkness, a warrior who had lived in the shadows for far longer than any assassin from the Empire. Kavor realized, in that final moment, Earth had its own defenders, ones who didn't fight wars in the open but eliminated threats before they ever became one. The silent blades had come to hunt. Instead, they had become prey. And with one swift motion, the hunt was over. The silent blades were the deadliest assassins the Galactic Empire had ever produced. Trained in absolute secrecy, they moved through the universe like ghosts, eliminating targets without ever being seen. Their latest mission had brought them to Earth, a planet considered primitive, its people insignificant. The Empire had expected an easy victory, and so had the assassins. But now, as Kavor stood in the ruins of an abandoned warehouse, his pulse steady, but his senses screaming, he realized how wrong they had all been. His team had started as 5. Now, he was the last one left. And he was being hunted. The mission had gone wrong from the beginning. Their first target, a human scientist with knowledge the Empire deemed dangerous, had vanished before they could strike. The second, a high-ranking general, had been guarded by security far too advanced for a species that was supposed to be behind in technology. And then, the disappearances had begun. One by one, his team had been taken without sound, without struggle. It was as if the shadows themselves had swallowed them. Kavor had searched for signs, used every tracking tool at his disposal, but there was nothing. No bodies, no blood, not even a trace of resistance. Only silence. He pressed himself against the cold metal wall, his enhanced vision scanning the darkened space around him. The flickering lights above cast distorted shadows, stretching unnaturally across the cracked floor. He had always trusted the darkness, it had been his greatest weapon. But now, it felt different. It felt alive. A soft creak echoed from the rafters above. Kavor's grip on his blade tightened. He had spent his life mastering the art of assassination, but even he couldn't fight an enemy he couldn't see. He activated his cloaking field, blending into the surroundings, and moved forward with controlled steps. He needed to find a way out. If he could escape, he could warn the Empire. Earth was not weak. It was hiding something far worse than they had ever imagined. A sudden shift in the air made him freeze. The temperature around him dropped slightly, a presence lingering just beyond his vision. He turned his head slowly, scanning every shadow, every movement. There just for a moment, a figure barely distinguishable from the darkness itself. It was gone before his eyes could fully focus on it, but he knew he wasn't imagining things. He wasn't alone. His instincts screamed at him to run, but Kavor knew better. Running meant death. Instead, he exhaled slowly, lowering his stance, readying his blade. If this thing, whoever or whatever it was, wanted to take him, it would have to face him directly. Silence stretched, thick and suffocating. Then, a whisper, not in his language, but something older, something terrifying. It came from everywhere and nowhere, surrounding him like a living thing. Cavour turned sharply, but before he could react, the floor behind him creaked ever so slightly. He spun, slashing with precision, but his blade met nothing but empty air. And then, pain. A sharp strike to the back of his knee sent him stumbling forward. He barely had time to recover before a second hit came, this time to his wrist, knocking his weapon from his hand. He rolled instinctively, reaching for his secondary blade, but the moment he touched it, something cold pressed against his throat. For the first time in his life, Cavour felt true fear. The figure before him was not human in the way he had expected. Dressed in black, its face masked, it moved with a precision that no ordinary soldier could achieve. This was no simple warrior. This was something else. Something ancient. A force that had existed long before the Empire had even known Earth existed. Cavour struggled, but the blade against his throat didn't waver. The figure leaned in slightly, its voice calm, emotionless. "You thought you were the hunter," it said softly. "But you never were." The pressure on his throat increased slightly, not enough to cut, but enough to remind him that his life was no longer his own. The realization sank in. His team hadn't been killed in combat. They had been eliminated, methodically, without effort. The Silent Blades had met their match, and they had never stood a chance. Cavour clenched his jaw, refusing to show weakness, but he already knew how this would end. The last thing he saw before the world faded to darkness was a pair of unblinking eyes, watching him without mercy. The shadows had won. The Imperial warship Veil of Dominion drifted silently above the dead moon of Osiris IX, its dark hull reflecting the distant light of a dying star. Inside the command chamber, Grand Strategist Thaltron stood with his arms crossed, his sharp gaze fixed on the holographic display before him. The mission had been clear: send the Silent Blades to Earth, eliminate key human targets, and return without a trace. It was supposed to be routine. Yet, there had been no word from the assassins. No updates. No distress signals. Just silence. And then, against all expectations, a single ship had emerged from the void, broadcasting a distress beacon encoded with the highest clearance. The ship belonged to Cavour, the leader of the Silent Blades. But something was wrong. It was arriving under manual control, limping through space like a wounded animal. Thaltron ordered an immediate retrieval. The hangar bay was silent as the ship touched down, steam hissing from its damaged hull. Armed guards surrounded the entrance, weapons raised, expecting the worst. When the hatch finally hissed open, the figure that stumbled out was barely recognizable. Cavour, once a proud warrior of the Empire, was covered in wounds, his armor torn, his breath shallow. But it was his eyes that sent a chill through the room, eyes that had seen something beyond war, beyond death. He collapsed to his knees, his voice hoarse as he spoke the words that would shake the Empire to its core. "Earth is not what we thought." Thaltron wasted no time. The wounded assassin was rushed to the medical bay, his injuries severe but not fatal. But even as the machines worked to stabilize him, he refused to rest. He demanded to speak, to warn them. And so, within the cold, sterile walls of the debriefing chamber, Cavour sat before the highest-ranking officials of the Empire, his body weak but his voice unbroken. He told them everything. How his team had landed in the shadows, unseen, unnoticed. How they had stalked their targets with the precision of hunters. How, one by one, they had disappeared without a sound, taken by something that moved faster, struck harder, and knew the darkness better than even the Silent Blades. He described the whispers in the night, the way his men had vanished, their bodies never found. And finally, he spoke of his last moments on Earth, of the figure that had overpowered him with inhuman speed, the voice that had whispered in his ear before letting him live. "Go," it had said. "Tell them. This is our world. And we are watching." Silence filled the chamber. The officials exchanged uneasy glances, their expressions unreadable. The Empire had conquered thousands of worlds, crushed rebellions, destroyed fleets. Yet here was one of their best assassins, reduced to a shadow of himself, warning them not of armies or technology, but of something unseen, something that had turned their own weapons against them. One of the commanders scoffed. "You expect us to believe that a handful of primitive warriors defeated the Silent Blades?" But Valtrin saw the truth in Kavor's eyes. This was no deception. This was fear. And fear, from a warrior like Kavor, was something the Empire could not afford to ignore. "We must act," Valtrin said finally, his voice measured. "If Earth holds such power, we cannot underestimate them. We must know what we are dealing with." But Kavor shook his head, his voice barely above a whisper. "You don't understand," he said. "They already know. They were waiting for us. They let me live because they wanted me to warn you. They don't fear us. They are prepared." The room fell into an uneasy stillness. For the first time, the mighty galactic empire faced something it could not predict. Not an army, not a fleet, but an enemy hidden in the shadows, watching, waiting. And as Kavor sat there, the weight of his warning pressing down on the room, he knew the truth that the others refused to accept. The Empire had sent its best to hunt the humans. But now, the humans were hunting them.